So there is a common misconception that Jesus is like a half human, half God type stuff, different parts to make up the whole, right? Which is farthest from the case. There has been instances within the Bible of Jesus existing before he came to be as Christ, before he adopted flesh. And there's a reason why I'm phrasing it that way. One of those is, of course, John 1, 1 through 3, if I'm not mistaken. And, of course, Genesis as well, right? He's always been referred to as the Word. And then there are different instances of a pre-incarnate Jesus in the Old Testament. And so, I mean, it's not like he kind of existed and then became human, like his divine, either he attained the divine essence or it reduced to a lesser degree because he got a human nature, which is farthest from the case. It just became what essentially is an extension of himself, which is pertaining to his flesh. Before I even get into it, let me just preface it with this. Your body is just an extension of you. It's just something of your corporal form. For instance, you're not your body. If you die, you still exist, right? Your soul, right? Your soul is not your body. Your body is not your soul. Therefore, that your body, as your current state of being, is something that you operate in the physical realm. But outside of that, you still live afterwards, whether it be in eternity in heaven or in hell. And so now, when we understand that, when Jesus took on the form of the flesh, we see this in Philippians 2, right? He took the form of a servant. What is a servant? He created something to serve his master, which is Adam. So what we see in on Philippians 2, 5 through 11, I don't know why I'm coughing so much. I shouldn't really. Anyways, we see a reverse account of Genesis, right? Genesis, where God created man to be in the image of him and his likeness, right? Referring to God. And then Philippians 2 is actually the reverse of that, where God takes on the form. He doesn't create it, right? Because, that implies different other things. But since there already exists the form of a servant, which is man, Adam, he assumes that he takes it on, he puts it on himself, and then he came to be Jesus Christ, right? And because it specifically says made into his likeness, right? It's just same wording, it's just completely different retrospect. And since him, right, as in Christ, as in God, taking on the flesh, that doesn't mean that I am no longer God, because since this is a being that existed beforehand, not an actual created thing, he'll continue being God as he was, is, and will be, right? And there's like different types of examples I can use this. For instance, like I could, God uses his speech, and his speech is proceeds from him, and it separates from like the other persons of God. But just because that happens doesn't mean the separation means that the end product or the result of the end doesn't become God. And the reverse is also true. That means that whatever came out of me, I don't cease to be God. We continue to being God in a different way, in a different aspect, in a different perspective. And also the leading out to this, because of course some outside critiques will say, well, this whole notion that God can like become man or whatever, this and all that. Well, technically he adopts flesh. So like, for an example, if we just take like a jacket and this represents as the flesh, I could put it on. I'm not the jacket. I just put on flesh. And so like whatever is me outside of that, pertaining outside of the flesh, that's what I basically start manifesting and start putting on flesh. That's what you're seeing right now, because obviously you can see things to a certain extent in the physical realm and whatnot, but that doesn't mean I am now the coat. So it's like he doesn't really have this, okay, he just loses 50%, now I'm 50% human, it's half and half. Now he has the divine nature and the human nature, all 100%, but they don't share anything. He just has both of them. Because if you think of it like a pool, right, and you divide it, that's not what God is. He just has two separate pools that they both exist in the person of Jesus, and they don't intermingle, nor do they take one from another. And so it's pretty interesting how the difference between being like a hybrid or half and half, whatever you like to frame it, because there is that common critique that Genesis 6, where we see a Nephilim of hybrid beings of humans and angels, which are referred to as Nephilim. That's not what's happening, because for one, it's just creation procreating when they really shouldn't. There is no pre-creation when he came to be about. God came, right, breathed into basically Mary from the spirit, and then the word of that enter her, and then he takes it out. So there's no like procreation process happening. It only happened afterwards when Christ was born. That's when Mary and Joseph started having more kids for their bloodline and whatnot. Jesus is outside of that. He was beforehand. You can see that where Joseph knew Mary, which is the same terminology that's being used in Adam and Eve, saying that they had that intimate process of procreating and whatnot, and then they have kids. Same language what happened when they first got Cain as their first son, and then they had brothers and the siblings of Jesus afterwards when he came about. So there was no procreating process. So to say that Jesus is similar to the old myths and they went through the same process of half human demigods, whatever you like to call it, it's the opposite is true. And so this is why that when Jesus referred to himself as Father, as God, his Father is actually God, right? God the Father. And so there will be like a lot of confusion if he refers to his father as Joseph, as he is the divine being. So even through that perspective, right, because you can explain this in a couple of different ways, if that were to be true, then whatever statement he has to phrase it in a way to avoid referring to Joseph. But every time he says my father, he doesn't have to make that distinction, because the way how he came to be about, how he adopted the flesh, and he specifically picked this method, there wasn't a need to. So that's pretty evident in the scriptures itself. Furthermore, in that same chapter, whether it be Luke 2 or Matthew 1, you can tell that there was no consummating between Joseph and Mary. So basically, everybody who came to be about aware of the situation, whether as a reader or them living at that present time, you can tell that all of this is very unique. It's not something that happened in the past before. It's just like something that was new, and basically played into the divine plan of redeeming man for their sins, right? Able to provide that salvation for us. And also the building up to it is really evident in the Old Testament, because if you see Isaiah, like that entire book basically foreshadows what God did. A good example would be Isaiah 53, right? It just literally talks about what Jesus will undergo 700 years before he even came about. And then you got Isaiah 9:6, where it talks about God being a son, right? He's being formed as a child. And so what was pretty interesting is like he basically subtly, like throughout the Old Testament, more specifically focusing on Isaiah, that there is some possibility that some place in the future that God is going to basically be a human to some degree and to some regard. This is what we like to call foreshadowing. It's probably one of my favorite literary devices. I know I've said it a couple of times, but it's just so interesting that how a group of people spanning over centuries from different parts of the world somehow came to this agreement, literally being separated by centuries, if not thousands of years, coming to an agreement that that we're going to describe an individual that's going to redeem us. I mean, that's a very hard pull, and the only way that's possible, I'm like, okay, there has to be one author, not multiple, in order for it to stay consistent to such a degree that even pulls from the first page to the last page of the Bible, that if you see the cross references, it's just innumerable, right? There we have discovered like at least like 5-figure number, but I wouldn't be surprised there's actually more. I really wouldn't.